Alright, I'm going to start working on actually fighting somewhere. And I finally got a nice big initiative differential, a 6-point initiative differential with the Prussians having the initiative. So the first thing that I did was I built I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I think I had just the 7th Corps and a cav division. The army was up here. The first thing that I did was build a pontoon bridge here at Saarbrücken to cross this major river. There's a major river hex here, but just a minor river hex here. I did this just to provide some more tactical flexibility, so I wouldn't have to advance directly into a combat hex. So I spent the first initiative point and command point doing that. That doesn't trigger any reaction, to my knowledge. I guess that's not actually Saarbrücken. What is this? Saarlouis. Okay. So then with the next command point, initiative point, expenditure, I did an army plus attachments coordinated movement for the first army. And the first thing they can do is they and the 3rd Cav division here can move into this space. There's already 2 units there. The interesting thing about the congestion rules is, from what I see in them, it just mentions armies or corps. It doesn't say anything about divisions, so I'm taking that at face value that divisions do not contribute to congestion. So when you're counting the number of counters in a space, in a hex, for congestion purposes, you're not including cav divisions or individual strength points under divisional command. So I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's how I'm playing it. So in this case, there's only 1 unit here. It is a rail hex, so you could actually have up to 4 corps, or you could move a 4th corps into that hex without paying that +1 penalty. After that, you're paying the +1 movement penalty. So what happens here is there's no terrain hex side here moving into clear terrain, so that's a 1 movement point. So for the first movement point pulse, this cav will move in here, this army will move in here. Now, for the rest of these guys, this guy here in the 8th Corps, I intend to attack here into Forbach at the 2nd Corps, but not until I've brought some more troops with me. Now the Saxon 12th Corps is attached to the 2nd Army. I believe the 2nd Army is back here under the tertiary command, yes. So maybe the 5th Cav is attached to them too. It is. 1st Army only has 1st and 3rd Cav, which are now both in this hex. So let me reevaluate where I'm going to move 8th Corps then. I think I'm going to move everybody, try and move everybody into that space, which will cause congestion, but these guys are, the majority of these guys are only moving the army that moved, the 1st Army, still has 3 movement points. And with congestion, that's what that's going to cost to move in there, because you're looking at crossing a minor river hex side into clear terrain. So that would be 2 movement. With the congestion would make it 3, because it is not a rail hex. So that's that. Although, actually, I don't think they're no, there would be congestion because the Army and the two corps will create congestion. Not, the Cav divisions will not. But in order to move all of these guys together, with this being the final destination hex, what happens is, for that first movement point pulse, First Army, just realized this is way at the top of the frame. I wasn't even looking at my camera frame. All right. So I'm not doing everything off camera here. So for the first movement pulse, First Army and 3rd Cav Division move into this hex. These two units, the 1st Cav and the 7th Corps, spend a movement point in place, as does the 8th Corps. That creates reaction for the Army here, Army of the Rhine, and all of its units, including the 4th Corps, but not the 2nd Corps. He is out of range. So all these units here, well, the Army reacts too, but the French Corps have a 1 hex. So I guess the Army counter can respond, and I may have played that wrong over here when I had the corps within the Army. I tend to forget that the term Army in most cases is referring to the actual Army counter. So it may be that only the Army counter itself has a 2 hex range, and everything else, well, the Cav also has a 2 hex range, but my corps only have a 1 hex range, whereas actually French Cav only have a 1 hex range too. So maybe just the Army here can react. Oh no, I've got Imperial Guard there, but they're only a 1 hex. So that is interesting. I didn't really think about that when I did it over here, although the developer didn't respond on that issue, saying that those core counters only had a certain range. Let me look up the zone of influence rules again. Let's see. 6.5. All formations and strength points have zone of influence. So for an Army, the ZOI is also the distance in hexes from the Army. Yeah, where an attached Cav or Corps can be activated at no additional cost. That was an issue here. All of the corps for the 3rd Army, the 1st Army, are within that 2 hex range. Yeah, I think it's the Army counter itself has 2 hexes. So by my understanding, the Army of the Rhine counter could react to movement into the space, and the 4th Corps could react to movement in or into the space. So what we will do is have the Army of the Rhine roll for reaction by the units expending movement points in this hex. And however, we also have the 8th Corps expending movement points, and that allows all these guys to react. And that's 8th Corps and 2nd Corps. Are they in the Army of the Rhine? No, those are unattached corps. Well, 2nd Corps is in the Army of the Rhine. 8th Corps here is unattached. and apparently optional. That's interesting. Let me double check my scenario setup and make sure that the 8th core is even supposed to be there. Yeah, I think I've got the wrong counter, because I don't see 8th core in the setup. So probably a case of me not being able to actually read the counter. So let me see if I can fix this and come back. Okay, I think I got it fixed. It was supposed to be the 3rd core, not the 8th. So the 3rd core is part of the Army of the Rhine here. But regardless, all of these guys can react, so I can roll for the Army of the Rhine. Although for the Army to roll for reaction, to use the Army Commander's reaction roll, the armies of attached corps and cavalry divisions offer increased flexibility for those formations. Division leaders and lone SPs never benefit from a nearby army for reaction. If the hex triggering a reaction attempt is within the ZOI of an army, the controlling player may choose to have its attached corps cavalry divisions that are also in the army's ZOI roll for reaction on their own, or to use a single roll for a group of formations. The controlling player may form them into multiple groups, provided no formation is more than one group. The decision of how to group the eligible attached formations must be made. The hex triggering reaction does not need to be in the ZOI of these attached formations. So, but it just said in the above paragraph, if the hex triggering a reaction attempt is within the ZOI of an army, and this hex is the one triggering the first reaction attempt, and this hex will be as well. No, it's a forced hex, so it is not in the ZOI of this army here. So this one is not. So for this one, all of the cores, everything that can react is within the ZOI of the army, as per the rule here. The hex triggering a reaction attempt is within the ZOI of an army. The controlling player may choose to have its attached corps or cavalry divisions that are also in the army's ZOI. So that could include this guy here, who is not in the ZOI of who's the hex is not within his ZOI, but it is within the army's ZOI, so he can also roll. Or I can use a single roll for a group of formations. So I could group these guys into whatever I wanted, probably based on who has the best reaction roll. The Army of the Rhine reaction is a 5 or a 6. For the 2nd corps, he's also a 5. And the 4th corps is probably also a 5. These guys look like they're all 5s. Yep. So I guess it doesn't really matter unless I want to make multiple rolls. But well, so each group must use the army leader's reaction rating, but for each formation reacting individually, the controlling player may choose to have the formation use the army leader's rating or their own. But it just, okay, this is still confusing me. Each group, and I can choose, so I could have 2 groups here. I could say this is the one stack that's going to roll for reaction, and then these guys are going to be another group that's going to roll for reaction. Now it says each group must use the army leader's reaction rating. But for each formation reacting individually, the controlling player may choose to have the formation use the army leader's rating or their own. So I guess the groups, so if I didn't group these guys, if I just said, okay, this group's going to roll and use the army leader's rating, this guy's going to roll by himself, and this guy's going to roll by himself, I could choose to do either the army rating or the guy's reaction rating. And so, this seems like a major level to break things down to that doesn't seem entirely necessary. I'm not sure why, if you want to group stuff, you have to use the army leader. Why wouldn't it just be each you can choose to have everybody within the army ZOI react using the army leader's role, or you can have everybody react individually. Just sort of more of a binary choice that seems like it would be easier to execute than trying to figure out, when you want to roll individually versus as a group. It seems like you would always want to roll each counter individually because you'd have way more chances to react that way. So yeah, I don't know. Now I think what was being discussed in my previous video, the developer, let's say his name's Kevin Burnetz, pointed out that you can't make multiple reaction rolls for multiple hexes. Although that's still not exactly how I read the rules. So under the reaction rules, each eligible unit may attempt to react. And then, so I'm going to say it was under 12.3. A formation may attempt to react for each hex an enemy unit enters or expends MPs in, even if an enemy unit already exists in that hex, provided the hex isn't within the ZOI of a formation. So that was what I read initially that made it sound like if these guys spend MPs in this hex on the first movement point pulse, and this guy spends movement points in this hex, that they could roll for each of these hexes. But apparently that's not true. Apparently when you're doing combined movement, you can only pick any one unit to react to doing the combined movement. And I'm trying to remember where he cited that. See, joint reaction for attached formations. Still must be missing it. See, okay. Only movement that expends MPs triggers reaction. Formation may attempt to react for each hex. Enemy unit enters or expends pause MPs in, even if an enemy unit already exists in that hex. Each unit may only make a single reaction attempt per hex that is entered by one or more enemy units, and may only attempt a single reaction attempt per MP expenditure when multiple units are moving using combined activation. So there it is. That's the other part of the rule. So this part of the reaction rules, the rule 12, only sort of gives you the first part where it says each eligible unit whose ZOI has been entered may attempt to react. And then a formation may attempt to react for each hex an enemy unit enters or expends pause MPs in. However, what I think this means is a single unit, not a case of multiple hexes. I think here it's talking about if one unit moves from hex to hex to hex, that each time that moves, you can do a reaction roll. What it doesn't mean is if there's multiple hexes of forces that are moving using combined movement, you still only get to make one roll for any one of those units. So, and I think that's what this sort of clarifies here, that may only make a single reaction attempt per hex that is entered by one or more enemy units, and may only attempt a single reaction attempt per MP expenditure when multiple units are moving combined activation. So I'm spending 1 MP, even though I'm moving 4 different units. Still only 1 MP expenditure. So the unit may attempt multiple reactions against any single unit or against any single hex, provided that each attempt meets the provisions outlined above, which means not combined movement. So I think what I have to do here is decide where my units are going to be reacting. Or, well, I mean, I don't mean where they're going to be. Everybody's reacting to the movement points expended in these 2 hexes, but I only get to make 1 roll. So, although here's an interesting question. Yeah, so maybe I'm still reading this wrong. Each unit may only make a single reaction attempt per hex that is entered by 1 or more enemy units, and may only attempt a single reaction attempt per MP expenditure. But here, I've got 2 separate instances of eligible reaction. This army can react to this movement point expenditure. This corps can react to this movement point expenditure. This corps can react here, and this corps can react. This corps in this division can react here. However, because these guys are not in the ZOI, or rather this guy is not in the ZOI of the army, he can't react as part of this group. My understanding is he has to react on his own. And in theory, all of these guys could react on their own if I wanted to. Now in that case, each of these guys will get to roll once. So what I'll probably do is do this as a group and use the army reaction roll here, and then each of these guys will have roll individually. Because I can't group them. Well, I could group him with part of the army here, but I can't group him because he's not within the army. So I can't do a group that way. So what I could do, so I can do a reaction roll for him, and then for these 2. These 2 guys are going to roll with the army leader rating. All these units are all going to roll with their own individual ratings. So we've got 4 reaction rolls to make. Let's look for our reaction modifiers. So target hex and all intervening hexes. So for the army that's reacting, you've got a minor river and a town. So minor river hex side, reaction modifier is a -1. I'm not sure why. Oh, I was going to say, why are there bracket values? Those are for front to rear. Okay. So the minor river adds a -1, but for the target hex, a town makes it a +1. So, and I don't think there's anything in the intervening hex. Nope, totally clear. So it looks like it's a wash for, but the trigger hex is in a friendly cavalry ZOI. It is not, so that doesn't help. It is 2 hexes away, so that's a -1. So it looks like we come out at a total -1 for the Army of the Rhine. And we roll a 3, so they fail to react. And that includes the 4th Corps, which is right here. He was part of that group, so the overall commander failed to react, so nothing happens with these 2 guys. Now down here, for the 2nd Corps, crossing a minor river hex side into a forest hex with a city. So minor river hex side is a -1, city's a +2. Wait, modifier only applies for cities or towns. Modifier only applies if friendly to the unit attempting to react. And this is, oh, it is a friendly city. That's a French city. It's a green hex. So, wait, is it the right color green, or is it part of this? Ugh. So the Prussian, no, yeah, that's Prussian. It's not French. Okay, so they're not going to get the friendly modifier. So those guys moved into that hex. So they're not going to get the friendly modifier because that's Prussian. So we're at a -1 for the minor river hex side. It is in a friendly cavalry ZOI because of these guys right here. So the footnote there is the hex triggering reaction and the unit attempting to react must be in the ZOI of the same friendly cavalry division, which they are. This cav division has both of these hexes in its ZOI. So that's a +1. So it's a -1 +1. We are straight up. And for the second core, we're looking at a 5 reaction value. Yes. We rolled a 6, so that's a success. So second core can react. And I think what I want is no cores isolated. Problem is, I also don't want to let this core, I don't want to abandon this hex, say, and move here, because that could open up a hole in the line here, allowing the Prussians to get in along this rail line here. Got a supply depot back here at Metz, which is not currently guarded by strength points, so I don't want to leave a big hole in my line. So the question is, do I want to have him actually, well, I can't react into the hex there. I think he might stay there. I think it's these guys that I might want to shift that way. So he's going to stay put, even though I got a rare success there. So for the 4th Cavalry Division, what are the, since cav divisions don't have commanders, let's see, Cavalry Division, there we go. French Cavalry Division reaction rating is 5. There's a surprise, everything's 5. In this case, there's no terrain hex side modifier. It is a forest hex, though. So a forest hex is a -1. And he can't give himself the friendly cavalry modifier, so it looks like he's a -1, so I need a 6. And I get a 4. So the cav fails. And now the 3rd corps will attempt. He also needs a 6, and he gets it. So he actually can react. But I think he needs... Yeah, he can only get a 1 reaction hex response, but he has to cross a minor river hex side, which is a +1 to movement, meaning that I would need a 2 hex reaction to be able to move. So a unit that successfully reacts may be moved by the controlling player 1 or 2 hexes without any cost in command points or initiative points. A unit may not enter any hex used by enemy units. Enter its hex, yeah. A reacting unit may not enter a hex prohibited, but may enter a hex containing enemy units, triggering combat. I guess I could have attacked. I could have reacted with the second core. I could have reacted with the second core into this hex, because this guy was not leaving this hex. He's not entering this hex. He's pausing in place. Meaning, while he's pausing there, I could actually react right there into that hex. So that's the way I'm seeing it. Because it says he may not enter any hex used by enemy units to enter his hex, but otherwise, yeah, no. So, yeah, I think I want to do that because I was thinking of doing it originally anyway, and now I could actually add this guy to the hex. Oh wait, again though, movement comes into it. Yeah, it would cost 2 MPs to enter forest hex, and they only have a one. They only have a 1 point reaction. Yeah, any hex that would cost more than 1 MP to enter during regular movement requires 2 hexes of reaction to enter. So, yeah, because the French can only get maximum 1 hex on the reaction because their commanders are so bad, and because of the. I mean, yeah, you could have gotten, had he rolled a 5 or a 6, ordinarily with a 5, that could allow you to do a 2 hex movement. Because, equal or 1 higher gives you 1 reaction hex. 2 or more higher gives you 2 reaction hexes. Because his reaction's a 5, it's impossible for him to get a 2 hex reaction. So the French units are incapable, most of them anyway, are incapable of getting a 2 hex reaction. So that's just the quality of those commanders is not high enough. So what we have then is the same, just where we were before. I think he's going to stay there. And of course he can't move into that hex either. In fact, he can't go anywhere. This is interesting. I guess he could go back here to this fortress. That is all he could do. That guy failed his reaction, so he stays there. Because otherwise he can't cross the river there, can't go to the forest there. He could go here. That would only cost 1 movement point to react into that hex. But that's a pretty ugly place to be, kind of surrounded there. So again, he succeeded in reacting, but can't actually move anywhere. So everybody's going to have to stay put. Because I think moving him out of the way is not ideal. So yeah, everybody's going to just sit where they are. In fact, I don't see any point in rolling for either of these guys in reaction on the next, because if he could react, I guess he could react to there. But again, I don't want to do that because I don't want to open my lineup. Even though I don't know where this guy's going, he could be going that way. He could be waiting for something. The fact that he's pausing while these guys are moving, and the guys that were already in this hex are pausing, tells me that they're either going to go to this hex. Because if they were going here, he wouldn't be moving at all. So, that's the kind of thing you could think of if you were playing opposed and trying to divine how you wanted to react based on where your opponents are going. So, all right. So that was the first movement point impulse, or the first movement point pulse. Yeah. So now these guys are all together. For the second movement point pulse, actually, if he was moving, he wasn't actually pausing in place. He's moving here on this it's going to take him 2 movement points to move to here. So I guess he could pause for his first movement point and then spend the next 2 getting to here. Actually, the next 3 getting to here because it's going to be congested. So yeah, might as well spend the first. Might as well pause in place for the first movement point. Second movement point, everybody's paused. Nobody's spending movement points in place. They're all paused. Third movement point phase, still paused. Fourth movement point phase, everyone moves. And because it was congested, because of that congestion, right, cost 4 to move in there. So now they're all there. This primary command actually moves with them. I'm just going to leave it out of the way. So everybody's done moved all into this space. Now we get reaction again. So the 4th corps, and this is bad because, you know, like he can't move in, he can't react into support there. So what I probably want to have happen is for the 4th corps to get the hell out of there, because he can react to here. I don't believe he can react to here because of congestion. Yeah, we've already got a corps. We've already got 2 corps. He'd be the 3rd. He'd need 2 points of reaction to do that, which he can't do because he can only have 1 point of reaction because he's a 5. So, but he can get the hell out of there. He can go here. So let's see if he succeeds. And the other option is the army itself could react into that hex, and we could have a big battle royale, which I kind of like the sound of that. So let's roll for the army reaction. He's probably going to fail anyway, and he does. So reaction fails here. He could still attempt to react, which I would have had to declare before I did any rolls, whether I was going to have him try and react independently or as part of the army. But he could have tried to react into here, to get behind the attackers. But again, you've got more units coming, so it could be ugly. I think the way it is, let's just say that they've all failed, and we're going to have combat. That is probably going to be pretty good for the Germans. Alright, so for our combat rules, player moves or reacts against a hex with non-besieged enemy forces. Those enemy forces do not avoid combat by reacting out of the hex. So, do an overrun. If the attacker has a 12-1 or greater advantage, an overrun happens. I don't think we have that. Second corps has 6 strength points. The Germans, we're looking at what, the 7th and 8th corps have 5, so that's 10 to 6, and then each Cav division I think is 2 strength points. So you're looking at 14 plus the army, which has 4, so 18 strength points. 18 to 6 looks like 3-1. I'm sorry, not the second corps, it's the 4th corps. Moved the wrong unit out here. It's this guy. So the 4th corps, but the 4th corps also, he's a 6-point corps. Yep. So it looks like 3-1. So no overrun. The Napoleon III or King Wilhelm does not apply because the largest army for the Prussians is the Second Army. Largest army for the French is Army of the Rhine. They're both with those armies, even though neither of those armies are fighting. Resolve artillery effects. Both players determine the artillery strength of their force. So my best understanding of artillery, and there's a chart that lists the artillery fire modifier, or the artillery factors. And initially when I read this, I thought that for every 2 Prussian infantry strength points, or for every 2 French Republic infantry strength points, it was talking about, a French corps had 2 artillery strength, and that was for all of the strength points within that corps. So that, a 6 strength point French corps has 2 artillery strength, whereas, 6 loose non-corps attached Prussian infantry strength points would have 6 artillery strength. But I think what it means is the corps counter itself has an artillery strength of 2, and then you tally up the infantry strength points within that corps. And I think that's because if you have a corps that has just 1 strength point in it, it still has artillery. I think that's what that's meant to convey. So what we would have is 6 times, it's 2 for every French Republic infantry strength point is for every 2 French Republic infantry strength points you have 1.5. So that would give us 3 points then. Yeah, for 6 points. I think I'm looking at the wrong French corps, but they're all 6 points. Well, I guess third corps has 8 points, but fourth corps in this case has 6. So, or I guess it's not 3, it would be 4. Because for every 2, you've got 1.5 points. So you're looking at 4.5. 1.5 would be 3. 4.5. Yep. So 4.5 points. I don't know if you rounded that up or not. Then for the Prussians, we've got 4.5 plus 2 for the corps counter. So you're looking at 6.5 artillery points for the 4th corps. For the Prussians, the army's worth 2. The 4 strength points in the army are worth 2 each. Or 2 for every 2 points. So the 4 strength points in the Prussian army are worth 4. So the Prussian army is worth 6 points. For the Prussians, 7th Corps, no, it's the 8th Corps. I think these are both 5 strength points, the 7th and 8th. Yeah, so 2, 4. So these each have 4 strength points, plus 2 for each corps counter, so they're at 6. So you're looking at 18 artillery points there, and then each cav division, I guess cav divisions don't have artillery factors. Army, Prussian Corps, French Corps, every 2 Prussian infantry SPs, French Republic infantry SPs. Yep, no cav. So you're looking at 18 to, what did I say here, 6.5? Yeah. So it's not quite 3 to 1 because of that half factor. I guess I really should look and see 13.3.2, whether you round anything, because that would be the difference between a 3 to 1 and not quite 3 to 1. I guess it doesn't matter. You're not doing odds. You're doing Rolling per strength factor. Okay, artillery strength factors in the pack. Yeah, you include the formation artillery strength and any artillery strength if it's contained SPs. Artillery strength for SPs only applies for each full multiple of 2. So you do rounds down. So yeah, so bad news there. So it's 3-1 on the artillery, but I think they're each rolling just to see what the numbers are. You don't do artillery like odds. If you look here at the artillery resolution table, you're just doing a contested die roll. So my camera may be running out of juice here, so let's at least get one of these rolls done. So you're rolling, what, 2d6? Yes. Plus modifiers. Are there artillery modifiers? French Republic is +1, Prussian are +2. But French artillery time fuse penalty. While active, French player halves artillery strength for any combat in clear terrain without a friendly fortification. So wow, his artillery strength is not 6, it's actually 3 because he's in clear terrain. There's no fortification. So the artillery fire modifiers, he is in clear though, so that's a +1. And that is the only modifier. And he gets a +1 for being French. So it's a 3. His artillery strength is a 3, so. And then we'll add 2 to the die roll. So that's a 6 + 2 is 8. So his artillery strength is 3. He rolled an 8. Nothing. So there's going to be no effect on the combat for the French. For the Prussians, his artillery strength is 18. And he's Prussian, so that's a +2, and it's clear +1, so he's a +3. So he rolls a 7, +3 is 10. And there's no 18 column here. You can see it just goes from 12 to 15, so I'm guessing he's on the 15 column. And he rolled a 10 on the 15 column. So I can't actually get in here. The glare is kind of in the way, but you can take my word for it that it's a +2, 1.5 D. So he immediately loses 1.5 infantry strength points. For a half result, you roll a D6. On a 1 through 3, lose another strength point. So he loses 2 strength points. He's demoralized after the combat, regardless of how it turns out. And the Prussians will get a +2 DRM. So, pretty terrible. So that's the French 4th Corps loses 2 strength points. He's down to a 4. And now we move to the combat. So, we are now looking at, what was the total strength point odds? 10, 14. And then his cav counts as 2 strength points, right? So, and we're going to have cav superiority. So let's look up more combat info. So you calculate the artillery results. To add the DRM, strength point losses, yes. They took the strength point loss, automatic demoralization of that. Players should note the artillery effects they inflicted on their opponents. These effects, including DRMs for the CRT and step losses, will impact the opponent's battle impact roll. Each player determines their total SPs by summing their total infantry and front to rear involved in the combat. Ah, so we don't add cavalry. But I think that's where cav superiority can come in. So we are looking at, what did I say, 15, no, 10, 14 to 4, looks like 3 to 1. So that's not, we're not on the differential table, we are 3 to 1. It's going to be a +2 DRM for the artillery fire. The French will add a +2 for the German infantry assault penalty. And then we've got leader bonuses. Leader ratings. Corps and division leaders influence combat by using their tactical rating. Army leaders do not have a tactical rating. They impact the army via an army reroll rating. Uses tactical rating. Yeah, so the French commander will use his tactical rating, which is a +1. So the French are currently at a +3 because of that German assault doctrine penalty. The German army leader for the First Army, is it Steinmetz? It is. Well, it's Steinmetz. So he has. Alright, I think I'm going to run out of gas here in my camera, so I'm going to pause this while I tally up what I'm actually going to roll. Okay, I have to say the combat in this is really, and it's funny, I've referred to this game once already, but it is the most complex combat in terms of different stages that you have to execute that I've seen since this beast right here, 1914 Twilight in the East, that had, you know, your different artillery phases, and then different like combat results, post results, like the battle impact. I forget what Twilight in the East called it, but it very much had a impact segment, just like this does, where you got to do a whole other roll and calculation. So, okay, so first things first. I already did the artillery, which we determined was the +2 DRM for the Prussians, a 2-step loss for the French, and then an automatic D after the combat. So for the combat itself, we determined it was 3 to 1, and then had to figure out what all the DRMs were. I ended up having to just write it down for the French. Because of the German assault doctrine, they got a +2, they got a +1 for their leader's tactical rating, they got a 1-column shift left for the minor river, and von Steinmetz gives them 1 reroll. For the Germans, they got +2 for that artillery DRM, +1 for cav superiority, and then I rolled, and when you basically you do a cav superiority roll, and you compare the strength points and cav, the difference in strength points that you have, and then roll off to determine if you actually get cav superiority. I think it says here, both players roll 1d6, adding included cavalry strength points. Highest roll gets a +1 DRM to the CRT roll. Then the person who has that +1 DRM can try and attempt to gain a column shift. So what you do is you take you do a 1d6 roll, and if it's higher than the difference in cavalry strength points that you have, you get a column shift. So Prussians had 4 cav strength points, the French had 0, so I had to roll a 4 or less, which I did, so I got the column shift. That column shift for the Germans negated the column shift for the minor river hex side that they crossed. So I got a 1R for the German cav. So ended up being right back on the 3-to-1 column. The Germans rolling on the large column, the French rolling on the medium. The result was an 8 for the French and an 11 for the Prussians. I went ahead and had the French re-roll. There really wasn't any way that they were going to prevent a D3 on the part, or at least a D2 on the part of the Prussians, but the Prussians would have had to roll a 1 or a 2 to get anything other than a D3. So what that means is I decided to use the reroll for the French to see if I could at least increase, possibly get a D3 on the Prussians as well. I could not. They rolled an 8 again, which was a D1. So ended up with the French took a D3 and the Prussians a D1. Now, for the impact. Now you do battle impact. First you take all your casualties. Because I did the cav superiority shift, the Prussians had to take a step loss in cav for that one step loss, even if it's your first. Every odd strength point loss has to be cav when you do the cav superiority shift, and even the first one. So for the impact roll, the -1 reroll counts as a -1 DRM for von Steinmetz and the army. Their best corps commander had a 0 tactical rating. They got a -1 for that minor river, but they did get a +1 because they attacked. They had units move from 2 different hexes to conduct the attack. So their total impact, battle impact to DRM was a -1. For the French, they had a +1 for their corps commander's tactical rating. They had the +1 for the minor river, but the artillery, they had 2 step losses and faced a positive DRM from their opponent, which summed up, you get a -1 for every +1 artillery DRM you had, and then a -1 for every strength point loss that was inflicted by artillery. So that was a big hit to them. That was a -3. Fortunately, their tactical and terrain effects helped them out, so they were also a -1. So the result on the battle impact chart was for the Prussians, they rolled a 6, which didn't really help them. If you lose the combat and must retreat, you may retreat through enemy ZOI without incurring extra step losses. They won, so it didn't matter. The French had a 7. If you lose the combat and must retreat, in addition to result 6 above, you may also retreat in an additional hex. If you are the victor in the combat, you may pursue a retreating attacker 1 additional hex. So what I can do is I could retreat through an enemy ZOI without incurring extra step losses, and I can retreat an additional hex. So that's not bad for the French. Could have been worse. They're down to 1 strength point. I mean, that corps just got annihilated. So we will stack all these guys back up. Now he's going to retreat out of that hex. Question is, where do I want him to go? I need to send him through the army of Alsace into that fortress, but let's see what the retreat rules say. I don't want to demoralize the whole army by these guys passing through. So battle impact is done. Okay, demoralization first. And I bet I could have gone through the combat sequence chart. The problem is I hadn't read the rules, so I was actually going through the rule book as opposed to the combat sequence on the player aid card. So we did battle impact only if no overrun. Then both players determine after resolving eliminate any army's cores with no SPs. That didn't happen. Everybody still has SPs. Determine demoralization, victory, and retreats. So determine victor and resolve all multiple demoralization effects, which the French are going to have multiple demoralization because they got one from artillery and one from combat. So demoralization affects all of that side's units in a given hex, unless unless some of those units are in a fortress. No. When one or more demoralized units enter a location containing non-demoralized units, so we do not want to pass through the army of the Rhine. So definitely don't want to do that. Okay. Units may become demoralized multiple times, either due to starting with a demoralized marker or due to demoralization results occurring for distinct reasons. Each of the following results in one demoralization level. Suffering a demoralization result to artillery fire and demoralization to CRT. Multiple demoralizations occur during a combat, so players are recommended to simply place a demoralized marker on that side's rail limit track and increment it for each demoralization result. Then once the combat's resolved and all demoralizations are addressed, the marker can be placed on top of the stack. The level of demoralization is judged in step 9 of combat resolution and is used for determining the victor. A side with 2 or more levels will lose 1 additional SP for each demoralization level above the first after victor determination. So after combat, one side ends with 2 demoralization levels and the other side ends with 3. The first side loses 1 additional SP while the second loses 2. After applying these additional SP losses, place a single demoralization marker on the affected units regardless of the previous level of demoralization. Demoralized units cannot enter a hex containing enemy units that they cannot overrun but can defend normally. A force that begins combat demoralized grants the attacker column shift. Alright, so after resolving battle impact and determining the level of demoralization, which is 2 levels for the French and 1 for the Prussians, the victor is determined. The victor is determined by the following process. If one side is eliminated, the French will be, but they're not currently. They won't be. They won't lose that last strength point until after victor determination. So that doesn't count. If one side used a cavalry death ride to avoid an additional round of combat, no. If neither side suffered any SP losses, no. If only one side is demoralized, no. If both sides, the side with the lower number is the victor. Wait a minute. That makes the French the victor? No. The Prussians only had 1. I don't know why I think that is because I just read this example that had 2 and 3. But it was 1 and 2. So the Prussians are the victor, not surprising. After determining the victor, resolve any multiple demoralization effects. The multiple demoralization effects, the result here is that the 4th Corps for the French is eliminated. I need to see what happens to that corps commander. If there's a section on elimination. Removal of 6-3, 13, 13, 6. If an army is at 0 and doesn't attach core, no. So let's see. Let's check 6-3 then. Any replacement leaders? Okay, so let's see. If the formation had a valid retreat path at the time of elimination, which it did, The leader commanding the formation and any contained division leaders are placed on the turn track to enter as reinforcements the next game turn. Okay, so he just looks like the leader just comes back. Retreating units. So I don't believe the retreat actually happens. I think they're eliminated in the hex, but they did have a valid retreat space. So eliminated French armies, corps, and cavalry divisions cannot be rebuilt and are permanently eliminated. So that's bad. The French permanently lose the 4th Corps. Or no, I guess they could retreat. It's any units, yeah, without a valid retreat path are eliminated and treated as shown below. But they did have a valid retreat path, so I'm not sure what actually happens to that French corps if they did have a retreat path. See, so the victors remain in the hex. This is the only advance after combat normally allowed, is not restricted anyway. So no battle impact allowed additional, so they're just gonna, that's what happens, they sit there. Okay. Well, I'll find out what happens to the corps. As for the French corps commander, l'Admiral, he comes back next turn. The second half of August. But the 4th Corps, I'm not sure. For now, I will put him over in the available forces. This might be something that the developer can clear up for me too. If there was a valid retreat path and a corps is eliminated on battle impact, or not battle impact results, but on double demoralization results, what happens? Are they permanently eliminated? Because they could have retreated had they not been eliminated. So anyway, there we have combat. Yeah, again, to me it's almost as beastly as 1914 Twilight in the East. I will be very curious to see if it becomes at all more intuitive or easily conducted. I'm not convinced that it will be. So we will see what happens. But there may be more comments here based on how I've done all the reaction movement and combat calculations, but I feel like I did get it right for the combat calculations. So the only question mark is that, what happens on corps elimination for the French in a situation where they are able to retreat. So more forthcoming.